Western communists as merely patriots and socialist dreamers. And it was in this atmosphere of benign acceptance that the party consolidated its penetration into government. In fact, attempts even to investigate communism were firmly opposed at the highest level.
The National Maritime Union was then under control of the communists, it's not now, and they were putting their operatives on ships, and they had a network of intelligence.
Robert Morris, for many years, has been a key figure in the anti-subversion program of the federal government. He was chief counsel to the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, and during World War II was the officer in charge of the counterintelligence unit of the 3rd Naval District in Washington. After describing how President Roosevelt had ordered the Navy to allow Communist Party members to serve as radio operators with access to secret military communiques, Mr. Morris then turned to the subject of Soviet defector Viktor Kravchenko.
So we had to meet him clandestinely, and he was with the Soviet Purchasing Commission. And he had with him evidence, substantial evidence, that the Soviets were using the material, the naval material that we were sending to them to fight the Germans. They were not using it for that purpose, but instead they were using it to build up a large navy in the post-war period to take on the British and the Americans. And I had extensive evidence of that.
When Morris brought this information to the attention of his superiors, he was met with cold indifference, was transferred out of intelligence work, and sent to a battle station in the Pacific.
Went down there and gave him all the evidence because Kravchenko was standing by, ready to give more information. So I thought it was quite a coup. And 2 days later, I received orders to get out of the country with only 2 days' notice. Apparently, it came to the attention of the White House, and the White House didn't want anyone checking up on what the Russians were doing here.
The Office of Strategic Services, known during the war as the OSS, was created to carry out clandestine operations against the Axis powers. It was headed by General William Donovan. It is now known that Donovan, instead of screening out members of the Communist Party, actually made contact with party functionary Eugene Dennis and recruited OSS personnel directly from communist ranks. In Yugoslavia, the OSS vigorously supported the communist resistance forces under Joseph Broz Tito and cut off all supplies to the anti-communist forces under Draza Mihailovic. At the end of the war, the Nazis attempted to surrender to General Mihailovic and to the Americans, but the Allied command refused the offer and insisted that the surrender must be made only to Soviet troops, thus ensuring that Yugoslavia would be in communist hands. Back in the United States, when the FBI provided General Donovan with evidence that some of his OSS personnel were members of the Communist Party, he replied, "I know they're communists. That's why I hired them." After the end of World War II, the OSS became the CIA.
Roosevelt issued an order to the Civil Service Commission that investigators were forbidden to ask any questions concerning the communist backgrounds or communist affiliations of any applicant for the federal service.
Otto Otepka, for 36 years, was an internal security specialist for the federal government. In 1953, he became chief security evaluator for the State Department.
This included, of course, people in such key components of the government as the Office of Strategic Services. One of the most ridiculous things I ever heard of as a part of the relaxation of the security procedures then in effect by the Roosevelt administration was an attempt by the president to allow the Soviet Union to have an NKVD office in Washington, D.C., while in reciprocity, the United States would be allowed to have a branch of the OSS in Moscow. Now, when one knowledgeable studies the composition of the OSS from its inception, who would be ahead in that situation? Obviously, the Soviet Union.
Why is that?
Well, because of the OSS, as history has now established, was comprised at the very top in key positions with individuals who were sympathetic to the Soviet Union.
Many of the early